Hi, welcome back. Thanks for dropping by. In this video, I'm going to talk about depth of field and the importance of it and also how to use it. With wildlife photography, it's something that we need to concentrate on and we need to be aware of it all the time. I've tried to put it into easy to understand terms, so I'm stood on my back garden waving a box around, noise of the motorway in the background, sorry about that, but hopefully it'll explain the importance and how to use something called depth of field. Let's have a look. So you're pointing your camera that way, and this box is your field of focus. This is your focus cube that you are going to be putting around your subject. Let me explain. You're pointing your camera this way, and just here is the focus plane. That is where your subject is, and when you're on autofocus or even manual focus, you're going to focus on that point. That's where your camera's going to focus, pointed that way. Now, when it's focusing along that focus plane, what you've got is you've created something called a field. This is your field of focus. So in front of it, you've got this area, and behind it, you've got this area. And you'll notice that in front is 1/3, and behind is 2/3. Now, what happens there is you can get all that in focus, and if you was a landscape photographer, you'd go with something like f/22 as your aperture. So you'd be f/22 and you would get everything in front of your subject and behind the subject in focus. So that's why you'll get people that do landscape photography, they won't focus to the furthest point, they'll often focus to a tree or a rock within sort of 1/3 of the distance, and that way this will be in focus and that will be in focus because they've used f/22, which is a very small aperture, which then makes more in focus. Now with wildlife photography, we don't want that. If you imagine you've got a bird in a tree and he's got all those branches behind him, it's going to be very distracting. So what you've got to do is you've got to blur the background. And the way to blur the background is use something called a shallow depth of field. So your landscape photographers have got a deep depth of field, but with wildlife photography you want a shallow depth of field. So you only want that much of that focus plane, because then what will happen is the back will be out of focus, part of the front will be out of focus, but this that's in focus then will pop out the image. It really does help with that. If you've got a deep subject, the ideal scenario there is to wrap your focus around that subject. And the way to do that is, if it's a f/4, which is a large aperture, then you're going to get so much of that subject, you'll get the front of it in focus, but behind you'll start losing that. So around the side of the subject, it won't be in focus, and that won't allow it to pop quite as much. You want like a 3D effect. So what you do is you go to, if you remember my previous videos, I set you with some settings of try 5.6. Now 5.6 will give more of the subject focus, and then you'll get in sort of a 3D effect. Now, depending on the subject itself and whether it's moving or whether it's stationary, what you've got to remember, going back to one of my previous videos, you've got to keep the shutter speed high enough, so therefore you have to alter the f-stop. So sometimes you can't go more than f5.6 because you need the shutter speed. But when the light's nice, your subject's stationary, if you go for f8, you're going to get all this in focus, and that really does pop out the image. So 5.6 is something that will give you good shutter speeds at low ISOs, but if you've got low ISO and you can go to f8, that is something that will increase the quality of your wildlife photography. Don't forget, I talk about wildlife photography. You can go online now and learn all about depth of field, and you can learn the whys and wherefores. But what I'm showing you is what you need for wildlife photography. Not landscape photography, not studio photography, but wildlife photography. And that's my point. So when you've got that much of the field, or that much of the field, that is called depth of field, or DOF for short. And that depth of field is something that you control, and you control that with your f-stops. It's as simple as that. But always remember, it's 1/3 in front, 2/3 behind the subject from where your camera is focusing on that point, because it's pointing that way, so that is the focus plane. So always remember that, and then see what you can get with your shutter speeds and see what you can get with your depth of field. But if you went for, let's say for f11 for example, you're going to get too much of the background in focus, and then it's going to look too busy. You want to blur that background. So I say the way to blur that background, f4, f5.6, and f8, you get somewhat of a structure behind, but it'll still be quite blurred. The secret of getting blurred at these sort of f numbers is that the background is a long way from the subject. So if the background is a long way from the subject, your f8s, your f11s, they're going to be fine because they will blur the background. The secret really is for you to get closer. If you can get closer to the subject, you'll blur the background. But this depth of field is so important, and that's why us wildlife photographers, we stay down at these apertures, which are a larger aperture, and you'll find that your landscape photographers will be f8 and upwards. Yeah, and that's really what we need. But you've got this box of focus field. This is your cube. This is your box of. This is your focus. This is your bit that's on. If you was to point a laser at your subject, at the end of that laser that's now hitting the subject, that's your focus plane, you've got at the end of that, you've got this box. That's the width of it. That's what you're going to get in focus. Yeah, so, you know, that's what you're going to get into it. But you've got to imagine that this box, yeah, is in front of you. At the end of that laser, you're putting that box over your subject. So if you can imagine that every time you're pointing, you'll know then what settings to go to, because you're going to have to blur the background, you're going to have to make it nice and sharp, because that's what you want, is a sharp picture. So bear in mind that this is what you've got. That's your focus cube that you need to put over that subject. Be it a fox, be it an eagle, be it a stationary bird in a tree. That is what you've got, is that box there. And as I can show you there, I'll just give you that, show you there, you've got 1/3 in front, 2/3 at the back. You've got your field, which is the total of this box at the top, and then you've got your sections, which are the depth of field. And it's the depth of field that, as wildlife photographers, we have to look at. And I'll show you some examples of some pictures where the background is blurred because the background's blurred, you'll see how the actual subject pops out, and it's great. Other occasions where you've got one bird at the back of the other bird, but still in the shot. Now, if you take a shot at, let's say, f4, the bird in front is going to be in focus, but the bird behind is going to be out of focus. Sometimes, because they're close together, it's nice to have them both in focus. And the way to do that is to go a higher depth of field, a deeper depth of field. And that way, you'll get the bird in front and you'll get the bird behind in focus. Now, let's imagine you're at the end, you're looking down towards the end, because don't forget we're pointing that direction and that's there. Okay, and you've got, let's say you've got a group of puffins. Now those group of puffins in that shot would be nice to get those all in focus. And if they're pretty much all on the same plane, what will happen is at f4, wide aperture, the one bird in the middle will be in focus, but all the rest will be out of focus. So you up your depth of field. So you might go to f8 or even f11, because what will happen is then that will be in focus, and the ones around, just a little bit behind, they'll be in focus. So if you've ever wondered, well, how can I get that bird there in focus, but they're always out of focus, it's your depth of field. So your depth of field works on the plane, and it also works on the depth there. On the depth there. So, just to recap, a lot of puffins, one in the middle at f4, f5.6 will be in focus and nice and sharp. The ones around that's on the same plane, or just a slightly behind or in front, they'll be out of focus. But at something like f8, f11, they'll all be in focus, apart from the ones that's really well behind. So remember that if you've got two birds on a branch, yeah, and you want to get them both, then your focus point is going to be over to, you're going to get sort of to the edge of one of them, but you're going to do something like f8, f11, and you'll get them both in focus. So remember, that is your focus cube that you're going to put over that subject, and you're going to get some great results. My name is Mark Blake. I hope you found that interesting and useful. If you did, please hit the like button, and if possible, please subscribe. Thank you.